The Spider-Man Classics McFarlane Spider-Man was a definitive Spider-Man figure for years, and as we get through this video, you're going to understand why. Also, if you're wondering why I called it Spider-Man Classics McFarlane Spider-Man and not the Marvel Legends McFarlane Spider-Man, is because back in the day when this came out as a part of the Spider-Man Classics line, which was a sister line to the Marvel Legends action figure line. Basically, Spider-Man Classics action figure line focused on Spider-Man and his Rogues Gallery exclusively. So there's that. But getting into articulation slash aesthetic, I'm going to have to grade this guy on a curve because this figure is 15 plus years old. And back then, I wasn't really taking care of my figures like how I do now. But either way, first thing first, I want to say this guy's mad skinny. The Amazing Spider-Man, more like the emaciated Spider-Man. And the second thing, the overall proportions are good, but because he's so skinny it can and spindly, his limbs, it can look a bit strange. Where I think this figure shines, ironically enough, is the paintwork and the articulation. The detail work on the figure is awesome. The webs are sculpted in. The spider logo on his chest is sculpted. Everything looks nice. It has a black wash over it, which makes the sculpt pop even more. Even if you look at his legs, where you can see the spandex stretching over his muscles, that's an awesome touch that I feel like we don't really see in modern Marvel Legends. But that's enough of me gushing about the aesthetic. Let's get into our articulation. For his articulation, his head looks up, down, 360-degree rotation, and no pivot. For his arms, they go out a little less than 90 degrees, 360-degree rotation, cut at the top of the bicep, really good double jointed elbow, cut at the forearm, wrist hinge, and last but not least, with the exception of the thumb, all the fingers are individually movable. So if you wanted to put them making a middle finger, you could. He can crunch forward that much. He can crunch back that much. And he has a waist twist that doesn't look too bad when you use it. For his legs, he has ball joints at the top of his legs, which is a bit dated, at least aesthetically. But it allows him to kick back to yesterday, kick forward to tomorrow. Perfect splits. Even better, you can go a little higher than splits, actually. Swivel at the top of the thigh. Double jointed knee works wonderful. Ugly boot cut is ugly. Ankle goes up that much. Ankle goes down that much. You get a toe hinge. And finally, a slight ankle rocker. Now for his accessories. Now, I don't have any of them. Why not? Because, as I said, it's been 15 plus years since I've had this figure. So all of the stuff that he came with is definitely long gone. But, on the bright side, I have a picture of the packaging that he comes in. And we can see the accessories there. He comes with these web missile looking things. And he comes with a wall to crawl on, as well as this frisbee disc looking thing with his face on it. I guess that's an acceptable amount of accessories, especially for the time period back then. You were paying for what, $10 or $15 for these figures now? And we could barely get those kind of accessories now. We paying damn near $30 for these figures now. So I would say if I had them, probably 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 for given the time period that it came out. Next, we're going to be kicking off a new segment. Basically, in this segment, we're going to try to recreate scenes from the comic book. More specifically, in this case, we're going to look for Todd McFarlane's artwork and see if we can recreate some of the poses that Todd McFarlane has drawn his Spider-Man in. And basically, we're doing this because it's often disappointing when we get a figure and we can't even recreate the poses that the artists or the creators have drawn these guys in. So Without further ado, let's begin. Okay, so for this first pose, what I tried to do is, replicate one of these iconic swinging poses. And they're all swinging poses, but for this one in particular, I got the pose generally. I think where the figure struggled is the fact that, one, as you can see in the figure, the foot is crooked, and two, that ab crunch articulation just wasn't enough to get him hunched over how he is in that picture swinging. And other than that, I had to talk about the sculpt work a little bit. With this Todd McFarlane style, you can see Spider-Man has a bit more bulk on him than how this figure has. This figure is very skinny, going back to what I said earlier. But other than that, I think it did fairly well with the pose. I give it a 7 out of 10, 7.5 out of 10. It definitely didn't fail, but definitely could be better. For the next pose, what I wanted was something a bit more dynamic. And I found this swinging pose, so I tried it out. And I think the biggest weakness is that this figure is in desperate need of some type of diaphragm joint or some type of torso articulation that allows his torso to tilt side to side. If it was able to tilt side to side, that would bring this figure to a whole next level. And to be fair, this is a 15-plus-year-old figure, and we have that in a modern figure. So, in all, it did really good on this pose. For this last pose, it was a total wash. I can't lie. It just didn't work out. That torso articulation was its Achilles heel. What it needed was more tilt. It needed to be able to bend down further. It was just a total wash. No good. No good at all. Before we get into our usual figure height and figure size comparisons, we're going to do a slight retrospective with regard to why the McFarlane Spider-Man was the definitive Spider-Man for so long and how it got dethroned. First thing first, we'll compare it with the Fearsome Foes box set Spider-Man. It used the same body as the McFarlane Spider-Man, but I think it came down to the head sculpts. The McFarlane Spider-Man used the head sculpts, used the head style of where Spider-Man has the larger eyes, and I think in general that's the aesthetic that people prefer when it comes to their Spider-Man designs. So it would always, I would say, fall short when it came to being a definitive Spider-Man. I think people would look at it as probably a good number 2 or 3, especially when we bring up the next figure. The next figure would be the Spider-Man Classic Snapshot Spider-Man. And this Spider-Man was heavily stylized and super articulated. And what I mean by that is it posed extremely well, but the stylization, him being like super bulky in terms of musculature, I think made him, like I said, too stylized to be a definitive one size fit all type of Spider-Man. And so I think the people that had this figure, they would use him, but it would be like a second option to the McFarlane Spider-Man. And if you disagree, you could comment below. But also, we got a repaint of the same Snapshot Spider-Man in the Sinister Six box set, which, of course, suffered from the same issues from being a definitive Spider-Man as the Snapshot Spider-Man, since it uses the same body. Now, the color scheme it used was a lot closer to the McFarlane Spider-Man, which is cool and all, but like I said, it used the same body as a Snapshot Spider-Man, so maybe it would have been a good second option for most people. Now, I know there's somebody out there that might be saying, yo, you forgetting about the Urban Legends box set Spider-Man. No, I'm not. That shit is trash. That was the worst Spider-Man out of those Spider-Man Classics figures, in my opinion. And in terms of fully articulated Spider-Man, that was the worst aesthetically. But jumping forward to 2015, we get the Hobgoblin Build-A-Figure wave. And in this wave, we get what's known as the Pizza Spider-Man. This Spider-Man was the definitive Spider-Man for a good, I don't know, what, 3 years? And That's because it came with the wall crawling hands. It came with the web shooting hands. You got two pair. You got your fist hands, and you got a partially unmasked head. And of course, you can't forget the slice of pizza. But out of nowhere, not even from a domestic U.S. company, came Mafex, Metacom Mafex, with their Spider-Man, and this was basically the Spider-Man to kill all Spider-Man. It had the perfect body sculpt. It had a shit ton of accessories. It was not much more you could ask for from this figure. You got like what 4 or 5 sets of hands. You got magnetic feet. You got a web accessory. You got an unmasked head. You got two masked heads. The only thing that was wrong with this figure was the price point, and I guess you could say it's technically worth the price point. Look what all the stuff that you got, but not everybody could afford that $100 price point, or maybe not even that. Maybe some people just aren't willing to pay that for an action figure. Maybe don't want to pay that. So that kind of, I would say, alien in a way. I don't want to say alienated some of the figure collectors, but that was like a little thing to be wary of for figure collectors. But another thing about this figure is that it's sold out fast, and secondary market prices are not friendly to buyers at all. So eventually, it just became hard to get just because off the secondary market prices. Now, up until recent day, Medicom Mafex has re-released this Spider-Man figure, with a couple of repaints and whatnot, but there've been cheaper options to come out since then, to where people don't feel compelled that they need to get this super expensive option unless they really want it. And that's in the Marvel Legends retro carded Spider-Man that came out in 2019. And when that figure came out, this was the new best Marvel Legends Spider-Man. I wouldn't call it the best Spider-Man. That goes to Mafex. But then, not too long after that, this figure was dethroned by a figure that I've reviewed very recently, actually, and that is the Renew Your Vows 2-pack Spider-Man. And this Spider-Man had it all. It was slightly better proportioned. It had the toe articulation. It came with an unmasked head, and you got all the extra hands to boot. So this is the currently reigning king, and that's because, like I said, all those little accessories, but also, even though it doesn't come with as many accessories as the Mafex Spider-Man did, it's also at a cheaper price point, and it comes with another figure. So that's what's really keeping it there. But other than that, I would say the best Spider-Man is probably the Mafex Spider-Man. In terms of the definitive Spider-Man that everybody's probably gonna use, it's gonna be this 2-pack Spider-Man until they release a better one. Who knows when? What, like a year or two later? But with that aside, for Spider-Man's height, he stands roughly, I wanna say, a little bit over 6 inches. So 6.25 inches tall. So decent size for Spider-Man. For size comparisons, hold on to your socks because this is the most that we've had yet. So starting it off, here he is next to Cyborg Spider-Man, Iron Spider-Man, Scarlet Spider Ben Reilly, Mafex Ben Reilly Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse Peter B. Parker by Sentinel, Marvel Legends retro carded Webman, Spinnerett from the Renew Your Vows 2-pack, Spider-Man from the Renew Your Vows 2-pack, and last but not least, Miles Morales Spider-Man from the PS4 video game. So at long last, should you get this figure, that's going to be a resounding nope. Why? Because we have plenty of modern alternatives that are better than this figure in many ways in terms of, I would say, aesthetic. I think the aesthetic that's going for this is that it feels like there was a lot of love put into this figure. But overall, their figures like the Renew Your Vows 2-pack Spider-Man that can do very well as your go-to mainstay Spider-Man. And if you don't like Marvel Legends, you guys should check out Mafex. They have some really good figures, and you're gonna have to pay more money, but they definitely have some really good Spider-Man figures. In fact, I'll probably post some pictures or a little video feed of it. But yeah, to only get this figure, if this is something that was absolutely you've wanted ever since that you was a kid and you always wanted this, I would say go pick it up. But even then, the prices are crazy. Like if you could find one for a good price, whatever that is, I think even one that you can find for a so-called decent price is still gonna run you at least $200. So buy at your own, I guess, risk, because I can't say with good faith that you have to go pick this up. This is a must. This is of course a classic figure. It's held up for many years, but there's definitely far more alternatives for a definitive Spider-Man figure than there was back then. And we have gotten many great Spider-Man figure over, I would say, just the past 5 years, you know? So this has been Bombastic Plastic out. Buy this figure at your own risk if you really want it. Otherwise, just stick to the Renew Your Vows 2-pack. Or if you don't want that, if you don't like Marvel Legends, check out Mafex. But until then, peace out.